Welcome to our video about safe dogs and communities. My name is Nicola MacDonald and I'm the Animal Welfare Manager at Companion Animals New Zealand. We've seen an increased attention on dog bite incidents in New Zealand over the last few months, and it's a topic that's understandably worrying for a lot of people. And with reform of the Dog Control Act now being discussed, there's never been a better time to have an honest, informed conversation about why bites happen and what we can do to prevent them. At Companion Animals New Zealand, we're passionate about supporting people through education and practical initiatives that make a real difference for both animals and the people who love them. And this is why we've created today's video. So rather than focusing on fear, we want to focus on understanding. Dogs don't bite out of nowhere. There are almost always signals and circumstances involved. And when we know what to look for, we're so much better equipped to keep everyone safe. Today we'll have a chat about how dogs communicate, how to read the early warning signs of stress and discomfort, and how to interact safely with dogs, whether they're your own or strangers. Our hope is that this video will help you feel a bit more confident and more informed about how to connect with the dogs in your life. To help us explain how to understand the early warning signs, I'm joined today by two wonderful experts, Dr. Erin Jones and Dr. Lavinia Tan. Dr. Erin holds a PhD in animal studies and is a certified dog behaviour consultant through her business Merit Dog Project. She's also an author of dog behaviour books and brings extensive experience in canine behaviour science and helping people better understand how dogs communicate. Dr. Lavinia holds a PhD in psychology and is a certified dog behaviour consultant through her business Adaptive Behaviour, and brings a strong practical perspective on how people and dogs interact in real-world situations. Both are accredited with Companion Animals New Zealand, and we're so pleased to have you with us today.
Thank you.
In our everyday lives, we encounter dogs in many different environments, whether we're out with our children or walking our own dogs or exercising in shared spaces. So for a moment, let's talk about how dogs communicate with us in those situations. And for this, I might share my screen and bring up the canine communication ladder that we've used here at Companion Animals New Zealand, just to explain how a dog may show early signs of stress or discomfort. It may be a little hard to see the detail on the shared screen, but we'll share a link to this infographic in the text below the YouTube recording and also on our social media. All right, so hopefully you can see this. Erin, are you able to explain a bit about what's going on in these stages?
Yes, absolutely. So I think one of the most important things for people to understand is that dogs are usually communicating a no or a stop or a don't do that long before there's any growling or snapping or biting. Actually, a lot of behavior is communication, or at least a window into how they're feeling. So what this infographic helps to show is that communication often happens in a progression. So it's not always this perfectly neat, linear way of communicating, but many dogs will start with much quieter signals first. So they may turn their head away or lean away or even move away or go still or close their mouth or lick their lips or yawn, lower their body, hold their tail differently, pin their ears back, or show a kind of tense stillness. Sometimes they may look as though they're trying to make themselves smaller, or they may simply be trying to create distance. And those early signals matter, but they can be a lot harder for a lot of people to see, especially things like licking their lips or yawning, for example, because these things can happen in different contexts as well as happen in normal contexts as well, and be quite normal. So, for example, if a dog licks their lips because you're getting their dinner ready, that's a very different context than if we stop and pet a dog and they tighten their mouth and they do a tongue flick and they show a lowered posture and squinty eyes and a stiff body. So it's important to look at the whole body from head to tail, as well as the context of what is happening around them. And this is how dogs communicate, really. It's important to remember that dogs aren't being difficult. They're not being dramatic when they show these behaviors. They're communicating about how they're coping in that moment. So they might be frightened or overwhelmed or unsure or frustrated. They could be in pain. They could be guarding something that's important to them or just simply feeling pressured or trapped. And that behavior is information to us. So it's really like learning a new language, and it is like learning a new language and something that takes quite a lot of practice. But I think where people often get caught out is waiting for something dramatic to happen. So they think like a growl is the first sign, but usually it's not. The growl is often the point where the dog is having to speak more clearly because those earlier quieter communication signals haven't worked or they haven't been noticed or they've been ignored. So when we look at a ladder like this, we shouldn't think of those lower rungs as less important because in many ways they're actually the most important because that's where we still have a lot of room to respond well. So if we notice these early signs and give the dog more space, we reduce pressure, slow the interaction down, or remove whatever's worrying them, then we can often prevent the situation from escalating.
Mm. Could I also add something to that? I
Mhm.
think also sometimes we see these signals, but they're misinterpreted. So some of these signals, these stress signals that our dogs exhibit, can sometimes be interpreted as them being cute or them being trying to make friends. And the ones that I'm thinking of in particular are like the face licking. So we call it kiss to dismiss, where kids are coming in for pets and the dogs come up and lick their face, or sometimes even like lifting and offering a paw. People think, oh, they're trying to shake hands, or the other one oftentimes is the dogs rolling over and showing their belly. And sometimes they are invitations to rub a belly and get a little bit more pets in, but sometimes the dog's actually rolling over as a way to sort of like tap out and submit and say, please leave me alone. I'm really terrified and I'm asking you not to hurt or kill me. And when we aren't knowledgeable about these lower level stress signals, we often think that our dogs are trying to be friendly or appeasing or trying to, be nice to us when actually they're actually asking for space. And instead of giving them that space, we offer more interaction, more contact, and that can quite easily turn into overwhelm, which means more intense stress signals. And I think that's important to know about just so that we can spot those and give the dog a chance to move away if they want to or ask for more if they are actually asking for more interaction.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And I think often around that sort of step 4, 5, people are misunderstanding what the dog is trying to tell people as
Mhm.
well. Like they might growl, but at the same time wag the tail. So do you have any sort of examples of situations where dogs are like driven into those higher stages and
Yeah.
people misunderstand? And yeah, we'll get into what people can do a bit later in this video, but yeah.
Yeah, okay. Erin has already mentioned some instances or some situations where we might start to see more of that more intense stress signals when those lower level warning signals are missed or ignored. I think oftentimes when escape or avoidance isn't possible, so the dog isn't actually able to remove themselves because there isn't the opportunity or the ability to. And oftentimes we can see these communication signals escalate faster, oftentimes when the stakes are higher as well. So some examples that come to mind would be sort of like a dog being restrained by their leash or their collar or being held and forced into a social interaction, oftentimes with someone or a dog that they're unfamiliar with, and they can't get away from them. And so sometimes, I've seen people saying, someone asking to pet a dog and the dog says, I really don't want to. And you can see them trying to get away and they're caregiver's like, yes, go say hi, and they'll hold the dog so the kid can come in for a pet, and you can see the dog's visibly not
Yeah.
okay, and oftentimes it will escalate to a little growl and a snap because they have no other option to ask for space, and that's obviously scary for everyone. But there's oftentimes a big lead up leading into that. Similarly, dogs that are being pet for too long or being held and hugged in ways that they don't like and they can't escape that way. Oftentimes you'll see that sort of like stiffening and freeze and then that snap and growl. And the other situation that I often see this too is also when there's resources in play, so really high value toys or chews that our dogs are playing with or chewing on, and people will come up to try to interact with them, and there isn't necessarily much warning in that case because they really, really like that stuff, and so they oftentimes just sort of freeze and hard stare. And if the person doesn't notice that and keep on coming in, then there becomes a much more obvious growl snap. Um, and so oftentimes in these situations, it's easy to sort of mistake that sort of freezing or not moving away as consent or permission, or in other cases, people might view it as sort of like the dog being defiant or dominant, and so they need to be corrected. As a side note, they often don't. They never don't. They never need to be corrected in those situations, but they'll tell the dog off or stop the dog from doing that because it looks like bad behavior, but actually it's a dog saying, hey, I'm uncomfortable. I don't like this. I would like it to stop and I'd like some space. I think, yeah, I think that's all I wanted to say about that.
I was gonna also off of what you were saying there with the eye contact thing or the staring thing. I also see that a lot. Like if a dog is feeling worried, they may look at whatever it is that they're worried about. Say it's a person, for they're kind of watching what they're doing, and often people will think that is an invitation. That the dog wants to interact with them, and that might not be the case. So we need to be really careful that we're looking at the whole body and the whole context of the situation, not just is this dog looking at me, because they may not actually want to interact in that moment.
Mhm. Yeah, I think also it's important to remember that every dog's going to communicate slightly differently as well. So not all dogs are going to show exactly the same stress signals or progress in the same way, based on the type of dog that they are and what they've learned over their lifespan. So, if it's your dog, then getting really familiar of what they look like when they're happy versus when they're not quite so happy versus when they're really, really unhappy, is really good. So you can speak their language and be able to spot how they're feeling and what they would be needing in that moment.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Thanks both of you. I'm just gonna stop sharing here. Right, there we go. Okay, so let's talk about a few scenarios just to help members of the public that worry about certain situations in their everyday life. So, for example, scenario A, with children walking to school, or children waiting for the bus in a bus stop, or in the rural communities outside their home, and a roaming dog approaches a group of children. Children can be a bit unpredictable, run, shout, that sort of thing. But even if they're standing still waiting for the bus, how can we help parents educate their children on what to do if a roaming dog approaches them?
I think a general good rule of thumb is if you see your dog approaching, just stop and be a tree, I guess. Stop moving, be really quiet, fold your arms, or just sort of like reduce how much movement you're doing, and wait for the dog to leave you alone. If you're really, really boring and not doing anything, the chances of the dog being interested in approaching and interacting with you are relatively slim. I think it can also be really helpful to just avoid eye contact with the dog, as most dogs will interpret this as an invitation to interact or some sort of confrontation as well. So just sort of like casually looking away or to the side is a nice, easy way to communicate to an approaching dog, I'm not interested in doing anything with you. Please just leave me alone. And to just, ignore them, wait for them to move away by themselves. I think also, even if a dog looks friendly, if they're not with a human and they're not being supervised or have their caregiver present, it's also generally a good idea to just leave them alone and not to touch or talk to them. Because even though some dogs may be fine at a distance or doing their own thing, when people look at them or talk to them or approach them or move into their space, sometimes they'll start to feel uncomfortable, and that's when you can start to see more of those sort of defensive behaviours, where they might start to growl or snap or even bite. That's assuming that the dog is friendly and just sort of like mooching around and doing their own thing, right? A dog that's coming in a little bit more intensely and more directly, being a tree might not be the best choice. And if you feel like immediate safety is of a bigger concern, then you may want to, instead of just standing there and doing nothing, find a way to put some sort of object or some distance between you and the dog to sort of slow down their approach and act as a barrier. So I don't mean sort of like run away down the street, because if you start to run, there's a really good chance that dog is going to start to chase. But you could just sort of like very calmly and systematically and fairly briskly sort of like step behind a rubbish bin, or put your school bag in front of you, or your bike or your scooter, or even sort of like take off your jersey or your jacket. Have that, so that if the dog does start to approach and looks like they're going to come in and snap, you can have something to put in between you and the dog so that they're not going to make contact. Most dogs aren't going to approach with the intention of attacking. So usually just giving them space, moving out of their line of movement and acting in ways that isn't going to surprise or startle them is probably going to be a fairly good strategy in terms of keeping yourself safe and not upsetting the dog and having a fairly low-key interaction.
Yeah, that's great advice. Erin, do you have anything to add or?
I think that, I mean, absolutely, I would say all of the same things. I think the biggest thing is not talking, not making eye contact, and just being boring is like the best advice I could give anybody with any type of dog that's approaching them, whether they seem like they're friendly or not. It's just the safest thing to do for both the dog and yourself.
Great. Okay, another scenario would be families in parks and picnics sitting down with their children. How do families keep themselves safe in a park environment if they want to have a nice Sunday picnic and there's roaming dogs around?
Hmm. Yeah, I think this is a really important one because parks and picnic areas are really quite busy and stimulating places for dogs. And it can also be quite chaotic and unstructured. So if a roaming dog does approach, I think the first thing I would want families to remember is not to panic, and not to assume that the dog is friendly or not friendly just because they've come closer. So we don't necessarily want to lure them closer or talk to them or all the things that we just talked about in the previous scenario. Um, I I think, a dog approaching, particularly a picnic, if a family group's having a picnic, they may be curious, they may be opportunistic, they might be excited or worried or conflicted. They may be interested in the food and not the people at all. So that can be quite confusing because you're not really sure if they're coming over, or it can seem like they're coming over to interact with you, and it's really the food that's kind of luring them in. Um, they also might be drawn to kids playing or the movement, that kind of thing. Or they might just be trying to sort of gather some more information. So again, our goal is just to reduce the risk without adding any pressure to the situation. So, avoiding eye contact, avoiding sudden movements, trying to just stay calm, no screaming, running, no waving arms at them. No trying to chase them away or anything like that, ideally. And it's understandable if children are going to become a little bit distressed, particularly if the dog is not wanting to leave or coming really close. But I think it's important for the adults in that situation to model that really steady behavior. And what else? So I guess if there's food out, that kind of, again, like I said, brings a whole other dynamic to the situation because especially if the dog is already kind of scavenging around, it can create some conflict. So we want to make sure that, if we can put the food away calmly in like a chili bin or a basket or something like that. It's probably the best thing that we can do, or a bag. If the dog does seem really interested in the food, but definitely don't snatch any food away from the dog if they have managed to grab something, or don't, physically push them away from that situation, because that can really escalate the situation quite quickly. And just to also remember that, that is a pretty normal thing for a dog to want to do. They're not trying to be bad, they're just being dogs. So while it sucks, it's not an unusual behavior for dogs to be doing either. So I think those are really the biggest things. And then, like Lavinia said in the last scenario, like if you feel like they're kind of coming at you, they're barking or they're growling or they're doing anything that feels really threatening to you, just having kind of something in front of you to make a little bit more space and separation, even if it's just sort of a visual barrier, or putting something in between you and the dog if you can.
Mm.
And giving the dog space if you can also, if you can do that. And to call counsel afterwards, if particularly if it was a dog that was making people feel unsafe, or behaving in a way that made them feel unsafe. And I think importantly, safety and compassion are not opposites here. So we absolutely want families to know what to do to stay safe, but we also want to remember that a dog who is barging into family groups or even showing threatening behavior is likely not coping very well either. So yes, protect yourself, protect your children, and create distance, but try not to punish them for communicating if possible, or ever.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think something else that can be helpful if you're sitting like on a picnic blanket or something on the grass and you see a dog approaching, secure your food if you can, but also you can just sort of stand up and move away, right? So then you're sort of
Yes.
like don't have a whole crowd of people around the big attraction. Stand up, move away that way. If you do need to make a getaway, you don't have to stand up. You can sort of like position the kids so that they're on the outside and you're sort of in between them and the dog, so that if the dog does start to approach, we have that extra parental barrier or grown-up barrier in between them. If you can see the dog's caregiver around, call out to them, ask them to call their dog back or come and get them, just so that they're aware, because sometimes some people don't notice their dog coming over looking for some food, and I think that can work really well just to sort of help diffuse that situation. Shouting and yelling or, stomping in towards the dog to try and sort of intimidate them to move away can sometimes make that situation more intense and add some fuel to the fire. So we really want to do things really quietly and calmly, and really as low key as possible.
Yeah. Great. Right. So in another scenario, this one's about our own dog. So if we're walking our dogs in public, our dog is on a leash. We might have a smaller dog too, and then an off-leash dog approaches. That can often create quite a bit of tension, especially if your own dog doesn't necessarily
Yeah.
appreciate that. So how would you suggest people respond in these situations, or the dog guardians respond?
I guess a lot kind of depends on the context as well. I think my general rule of thumb would be if you can see the dog's caregiver around, yell out to them, ask them to call their dog. Sometimes they will, sometimes they won't. They will, but they won't be able to get their dog back. But obviously, it lets the people know that there's something about to happen and we need their assistance. If there isn't anybody around or if the dog isn't under control, then the best rule of thumb is to just like with the kids at the bus stop, if you can just move away briskly, put as much space and barriers between you and the off-leash dog is usually the best rule of thumb in the situation if you don't want to have any sort of interaction. Again, you don't really want to run because this can encourage chasing, but usually I find most dogs that are wandering will have a maximum distance that they're willing to go away from the human, and if you get far enough away, they'll eventually give up and turn back around and start to do something else. Obviously, we don't always have the space or the opportunity to move away from this other dog. So if we're in a fenced in area or we're kind of closed in, and getaways isn't going to happen, then other ways that you can sort of work through the situation that can be helpful is sort of tossing a handful of treats in the oncoming dog's face. They get a nice little surprise of food flying at them, and oftentimes that will buy you enough time while they're stopping and eating the treats to move away past them or get your dog somewhere where you're going to be safer. If you don't have any treats with you, or if the dog's really excited and not really interested in food, then what you can also do is sort of stop, stand your ground. You can sort of move your dog behind you if they need a bit of help and protection. If you stop, stand your ground, and oftentimes just sort of like stand really big and tall and assertive, put your hand out in front of you and just say no or stop or sit. Oftentimes that's enough to have the dog go, whoa, okay, maybe that's not a great idea, and sort of deter them from further interaction. There are other sort of more confrontational and less nice strategies. If you have a drink bottle, you can try spraying some water around in front of you to discourage the dog from coming closer. Umbrellas can also work really nicely as a barrier. Some sort of like tree or bush or bin or something can also work nice as a sort of obstacle to impede that sort of movement in towards your dog. If you have a smaller dog and you're worried about the dogs making contact and having interaction, a lot of people want to just pick that smaller dog up. Sometimes it's not the best idea because oftentimes it makes your dog a lot more interesting because now they're up and taller, and the other dog can start to become more interested and want to approach. And then you oftentimes have that dog jumping up onto you to get to your dog, which can obviously be a lot worse than just the dog being on the ground and you moving away. If you're super, super worried, then putting your dog up somewhere high or over a fence. I've heard a story of someone putting their dog in a bin to keep them safe while they deal with their off-leash dog. So removing them out of that situation obviously is easier, but that's not always possible depending on where you are. Um, that's assuming that sort of if the dogs get close enough to interact, it's not going to go well. If you have a dog where you are confident in their social skills and their behavior and their training, and if a loose dog looks friendly and you're seeing this sort of loose, relaxed body language and a polite, sort of slow, pausing, indirect approach, then theoretically you could also just let the dogs have a brief little butt sniff and sort of get that out of the way and over and done with. Because most of the time, after that couple of seconds of interaction, the loose dog's satisfied. They've, gathered some information and they're happy to move on. However, for this to work, you kind of need to know that your dog will listen to you so that you can move them on if you need to, and that you can manage that interaction so that we don't have sort of super tight leashes and risks of escalation. But you also need to be prepared to intervene if after that butt sniff things do start to escalate and go awry. So I would say only do that if you're really confident in your ability to read the oncoming dog's body language, you're really confident in your dog's social skills and training, and you'll be able to diffuse any situations if things do start to escalate.
Yeah.
Yeah, those would be my suggestions.
Yeah, I agree. I think space is a really important one, and it's something that we can be just very mindful of. Like, I'm always keeping an eye out for what dogs are around and what they are communicating to me, because that their body language is just as important as my own dog's body language when I'm walking, to
Yeah.
kind of figure out what their intentions are, and whether I can kind of trust that the interaction will go well or not. And then I kind of make an educated decision based on whether I should turn around and make or create more space, or if I can just continue with the direction I'm going. And again, that's going to depend on your dog and how comfortable they are with that approach. But I also did want to add one little quick caveat. I guess if you're the person with the dog who is approaching other dogs, and you're coming into, maybe their recall isn't great, and so you're coming into the other dog's space to leash your dog because they're not listening to the recall, or they don't understand what you're asking of them, or the other dog is too interesting, obviously, then that can create a lot of conflict for the dog who is on leash, because this not only is there now a dog there that's creating a lot of tension, but then another human is coming in. Sometimes they're quite upset, or they're stomping, or they're reaching into the leash dog's space, and that can be quite scary for a lot of dogs. So, just be mindful of who's around and what your behavior is doing as well in those situations.
Mm. Yeah. I think also if you have a dog that is sensitive about other dogs coming into their space, then sometimes we can make our walks a lot easier by being sort of a little bit more selective and mindful about choosing where we walk our own dog. So if I have a reactive dog, then I would generally want to avoid sort of like narrow trails or narrow paths with lots of blind corners where I know that there's going to be a lot of off-leash dogs. Maybe the beach on a Sunday afternoon, not a great idea to walk your reactive dog because there's going to be a high risk of other dogs wanting to say hi. So, choosing spots where you have good visual distance, where you can see things happening or people coming or dogs coming in from far away, so you have the ability to escape if you need to, can sometimes mean you don't have to worry so much about these loose dogs if you have a dog that's going to have challenges in those situations. I think that's also really helpful.
Mhm.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
good. Thank you. We're running out of time a little bit, but I do just really quickly want to ask the last question, if that's all right.
Yeah,
So,
for
and I
sure.
think a lot of what you've already said probably helps answer
Yeah.
this question as well. But
Yeah.
if you're a runner and you run in mixed use areas such as parks or on rural roads, and you encounter a dog rushing at you because, especially in rural communities, there's often dogs loose on the properties, and they might run out of the driveway at you as you're running past. What would you recommend for runners? They might be wearing high vis as well in the winter, which obviously to dogs are quite exciting, I suppose. A runner coming past in a high vis vest, and yeah, what would you recommend they do?
Yeah, I mean, we did cover quite a bit already, but definitely, the fast movement can trigger chase behavior in some dogs. And then, especially in rural or semi-rural areas, a runner may kind of suddenly appear near a property or a space that the dog feels protective about. So, I guess the first thing that I would say is that, we are boring, right? Again, like we stop running. We don't try to outrun the dog. That's the most important thing because that's probably just going to escalate the situation. Likely when you get far enough away, if it's a property situation, like if you get far enough away from the property, they're probably just going to turn around and go home. But we still don't want to kind of escalate that situation. So it's best if we can just stop running, just be really boring, stop, moving our hands around too much, those kinds of things, and being very, turn sideways to the dog, not staring at them, the same things that we said earlier about if we need to create a barrier between us and the dog, if you have something that you can do that with. Maybe it's a parked car or a gate or a tree or anything. Even that visual barrier can sometimes really help. So yeah, we just really want to be quite boring about about our what we're doing, and then just move very slowly until you feel like you can move past. I wouldn't then turn around and run away because that's probably going to re-trigger the behavior, even if the dog seems like they've sort of calmed down a little bit. So those are, I guess, the biggest things that I would suggest. And then, of course, like being mindful of like if you're on a tight path where there's blind corners, or if you're passing another dog on a footpath and they're on lead and you're running up behind them or beside them, maybe just slow down or even walk past them. Particular if the dog is showing behaviors that they are a little worried about you, maybe they're barking or lunging at the end of their lead, or just maybe bow out around them a little bit so to give them some more space if you can, if that's available to you. Those kinds of things, or altering your route if you know that there's dogs that are in a particular area that you like to run. Maybe you go on the other side of the street, or you take a different route, slightly different route, so that you're not running into those situations.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. All right, we'll stop there. Thank you so much to both of you for sharing your insights and all that advice. I really think you're going to help a lot of people. And anyone out there, if you want to know more about dog behavior or stress signals, please head to our website where we've got a lot more information at companionanimals.nz, and also on our YouTube channels, there's a lot more educational videos there. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you.